I'm really excited to be here. I've spent all day in the garden photographing and just taking in the trees and nature, and it's wonderful. So everybody's here to learn about vines, and vines grow either by twining, by tendrils, or by sucker discs, or by or clasping. And so when you're growing vines, you need to know how they grow to be able to tell you what to grow them on. Because the biggest mistake I see people making is they'll go buy a 6-foot fan trellis and they'll put a vine on it, and that vine has left that 6-foot fan trellis 30 days after it's been planted, and it's all over everything else. Which brings me to my first slide. This is at my house, and this is the coral vine. Okay, there is actually a 6-foot fan trellis under here. And it went from a 6-foot fan trellis to I stuck an arbor under there to get it up higher. And then what is so crazy about this vine, I love this vine. It dies down every winter. It comes back when the soil warms up, and it just jumps out of the ground. And it has no support from this point, okay? But what it does, it makes these tendrils, and these tendrils fork like a snake's tongue, and they actually will go inside, they will find a crack, or they will go underneath the hardy plank, and they actually swell out and make a nodule underneath there so that it can support itself. And it makes it really hard to get that stuff off of the hardy plank without a ladder until, to get it off of the wall. There's actually pieces hanging there. This is a wonderful, I see this vine, it's very happy on a 4-foot chain link fence, but it will run half a mile on a 4-foot chain link fence. And it comes in white, and it comes in pink, and when this vine jumps up out of the ground in the spring, like once that soil warms up, it jumps up. It has this huge amount of energy that it flushes with. And once you cut that top off, it's like it loses its verticality. It wants to just lay, and it starts growing over everything. So it loses, when you chop it off at the top, it loses that ability to go up. So then it runs long ways. I dug it up this winter because it's like it's not going to the roof this year. And so when I dug this up, I had no idea this vine, I have got a tuber that is this big, like it's bigger than a basketball. Yes, I never knew this vine had giant tubers. And it also, all the little seedlings, when they germinate, the little seedlings will have tubers. So this plant was never an invasive plant. But when it's happy, it multiplies prolifically. But it is a great vine, and in finding that perfect spot is the key. And believe me, we have to try a lot of different spots and a lot of different ways to grow it, to get it exactly where we want it. Okay, let me get used to this thing here. So full sun to part shade. Doesn't it look like a dragon going up the side of the house? And then this is my son's window, and he actually has like a little vent where there's a little portable air conditioner. Well, it grows through the vent and out the other side, okay? These plant behavior with vines is incredible. It really is. Now, Dutchman's pipe. Now, this is one that is really interesting. And they make great, they can be evergreen. They can die down to the ground. These are not host plants for the butterflies. These are just ornamental. Part shade, full sun. Again, this one would grow very nicely on a 4-foot fence, totally root hardy. and spread down. It was very easily kept on a 4-foot wrought iron fence. But when you plant it at the base of a pine tree, it will climb up a pine tree. And it's really nice because it has these really long, really interesting flowers. Tangerine Beauty, crossvine. I think that's what's planted out here on the Tangerine Beauty. So we have 2 crossvines. We have the native, which is only a spring bloomer, okay? The native is yellow with a red throat, and it climbs by tendrils, and it twines. Now, Tangerine Beauty, if people ask me, I want an evergreen vine that flowers 8 to 10 months out of the year for full sun, what would be your recommendation? And my recommendation would be Tangerine Beauty. Because the hummingbirds love it. You can see what it does. It gets great fall color, great winter color. Totally evergreen. May need a little pruning, keeping it on like a trellis, like that size out there. But pruning, you know, when you're growing vines, you will always have a sharp pair of scissors or a sharp pair of pruners because they need discipline. And we must discipline these vines. So this is a fantastic vine, no pest problems. And you may be walking through the woods and see a vine growing up a tree, and it's probably the native crossvine. Spring bloomer only, and then this one blooms 8 to 10 months out of the year.
Does that one grow, does the coral beauty grow like the other one? The native one just goes to the top of a tree and stays up there?
Yes, and they both will do that. They will both do that because they want to get to the top, just like us. We want to get to the top, and then we're going to spread out from there. And so it's like when I tried to grow a vine on a wall, a brick wall, you know, you'll have all these great ideas and visions. You put all this wire. You're going to try to keep it at like 4 to 6 feet. What does the vine do? Straight to the eave and that way. And it's like, whoa. Okay, so that didn't really work. So yes, you just kind of have to do a lot of pruning, but that is exactly how they want to grow. Oops. This is touchy. Touchy. Hang on. Mama. There. So there is an evergreen clematis or clematis, however you want to say it. Clematis armandii. Totally evergreen. It is slow growing. But I tell you what, it is beautiful. This one is apple blossom. It is a late spring, early summer bloomer. It has beautiful long leaves on it. We had it at the Botanic Garden. It grew to the top of a 6-foot fence and then kind of just cascaded down. And the foliage is beautiful. It is, and it was full from the top of the fence to the bottom. So it was one that would fill in that space. So that's the other thing when you're using vines for screening or privacy, you want to know if they can produce leaves where your eyes are and not grow past there where you're looking right through. And it's not producing any privacy for you. This one, slow growing, but once it starts growing, once it gets established, is beautiful. I would not call this a vigorous vine as compared to others, but it is one that is very well behaved, does not need much discipline, and wants well-drained soil. All vines pretty much want well-drained soil and not wet feet because we need air at the roots. So this was when I first planted my white, because I planted the white coral vine. And I planted the Clematis texensis. This one's called Princess Di. And it has such a leather leaf. It's really beautiful. This was early on when they were both this is a very slow growing, I would even call it almost a diminutive vine. It's one that you wouldn't want to put next to something that's very vigorous because it will grow over it and shade it out and smother it and push it off the trellis, so that it can find another place just to try to survive. But this is one, the Clematis texensis, Princess Di. There's also one called Duchess of Albany. They have more of a leather flower, very thick petals. This one is easily kept on a 6-foot fan trellis. Very easy. Beautiful, just flowering all summer long. Our sweet autumn clematis is really nice. Nobody pays attention until this thing goes into bloom in the fall. And all of a sudden in the fall, you'll see just this burst of white flowers. And you're wondering, what is that? That is just so beautiful. No, there's actually shrubs underneath here. They come up, they go to seed, they flower, they go to seed, and the seeds have little wings on them, so they float. And they land in places, and the reason they float is so they have a chance of germinating and growing on their own without fighting mama for all of the resources. So this was at Montgomery County Extension, growing up on an arbor. I've seen this on a 6 or 6 foot wrought iron fence, very nice, beautiful evergreen. It has silvery zoning on the leaves. And the clematis, it doesn't really have tendrils, but its leaflets actually clasp. They actually will wrap around the structure itself. Fall bloomer, full sun, part shade, wonderful vine, no pest problems at all.
Love it.
What? Love bugs? Because it's white.
You just have thousands in your yard.
Well, you're keeping them in one spot. If you have a white car, you know, it's kind of like horse flies. Horse flies are attracted to white as well. And I remember at the Botanic Garden, we'll be riding on a little white cart, and I've got people sitting on the back of the cart, and the horse flies are chasing them. And I turn around, and they're sitting there going, whack, whack, get me out of here. These horse flies are biting me. But white does attract the love bugs, and it also attracts the horse flies. Now, the creeping fig. You know, we don't have many wall vines that, like you find up in the Northeast with the Boston ivy that gets the beautiful fall color, the winter color with the red leaves and the orange leaves. This is really the only plant, the only vine that we can plant on brick or a solid surface, and it grows up and attaches itself to the brick. And it can climb in closed, locked windows, kind of like the rats, you know, they find that little spot. And it is, the variegated variety is very unstable. It's pretty, but it's very unstable. So it reverts back to green. So it's just not a good one for us. Even though we have it and people plant it, but the white will eventually turn solid green. It is great because it gives that old English feel. You know, if you've got a brick mailbox, you can put it around a brick mailbox and it just really has that old country feel, that old English cottage garden feel. And the fig vine actually produces figs, but they're about 2 inches long, and they have a little nipple at the base, and they're really not edible. Nothing eats them, but the plant has to be mature. So the leaves are much larger. This is a juvenile stage, and these leaves are small. They may be 3/4 of an inch to an inch, where these are 1.5 to 2.5 inches long. So the plant has to be mature for it to produce fruit. Now, the only thing about having a fig ivy wall is it can fall off the wall. This plant actually attaches itself. It has sucker disc, and it's like cement. And that's what makes it really hard to get off of your brick. But this is a shot that I found on the internet. And it's like, you know, I've seen that happen on a much smaller scale, but that's exactly what can happen when you have an old planting of it. It just gets so heavy that it just falls off the wall. Now, the second best evergreen vine, and y'all probably see it in the woods blooming, it's escaped, is the Carolina jessamine. And it is evergreen. It's evergreen here, isn't it, Dawn? It's evergreen and flowers 2 times a year. It flowers in the spring and it flowers in the fall. And it's a twiner. So it twines as it grows. And if you like to get into topiary kind of diamond patterns or create a heart or do a diamond espalier, this is a perfect vine because it will twine, you can trim it, and you can actually make patterns with it. It's very tough, very easy, very drought tolerant, grows in sun, grows in shade, flowers in shade, is very drought tolerant. And I also found that people are using it homeopathically for ailments like lethargy, exhaustion and weakness. So it's like, you know what, I think I need to get some of that and try that out. The pink jasmine, we find this one around Valentine's Day. And happy Valentine's Day to everyone. You see these grown in little hearts on little rings, and this is so wonderfully fragrant. This is called the pink jasmine. The buds are pink, they open to white, they are very, very fragrant. But the only thing about this vine, there's 2 things. It can freeze to the ground, and it's only a spring bloomer. So you only get that spring shot. And then if it froze, guess what? You don't get that. Okay? So the alternative to that is the poet's jasmine. Are y'all growing that up here? This is evergreen. This is one of the jasmine that flower all summer long. It flowers all the time. It's very fragrant. And one of the ladies who was a volunteer at Mercer many years ago, she's from India. She says this is the flower that they use in some of their perfumes. One of the jasmines that's in their perfumes and lotions. So this is poet's jasmine. This is at my house. This is a 6-foot fan trellis, and I just shear it. Actually, I haven't sheared it in a while, can't you tell? But here it is, kind of flat. And by trimming the top and trimming the front, you're going to make it fuller and thicker, and you can make it full from the top all the way down to the bottom. No pest problems, drought tolerant. It's growing in probably 16-inch wide bed with the house, the brick, and the concrete. So and it gets like 6 hours of sun. So that's kind of a tough space, but it works just fine there. Very fragrant. One of my favorites. There's also a double version of this. Now, I had to put this in here because how many of us, when we were kids, went to the woods and pulled that little stem out of that flower and got that one drop of nectar? Okay, we use that nectar to kind of like change the smell of our breath from smoking those grapevine sticks, right? Dawn, you're too young. But every time this goes into bloom in the spring, it just takes you back to your childhood because it is Japanese honeysuckle, but it has a short bloom period, maybe 2 to 4 weeks in the spring. The flowers are white when they come out and they turn yellow, wonderfully fragrant. I just had to put that in there, reminiscing. Oh, I don't like this remote. I'm spastic. Mama. Okay, behave. There. So this is one of our natives. This is the coral honeysuckle. This is great. This is a small vine. You could easily keep it on a 6-foot fan trellis or a short post. It doesn't have any way to attach itself, so it requires tying, coaxing. Once you can kind of get it around and it gets woody, it kind of supports itself. This is not a full sun vine. It does not like full sun. It likes to dry out in between watering, so it doesn't like wet feet. It is a great hummingbird plant. It is semi-deciduous, so it loses leaves in the winter, and then you have this kind of like woody look. The reason you would grow this is for the hummingbirds and the butterflies. I would not call this an ornamental, something that you would want to put In your face, 12 months out of the year, somewhere kind of in the back of the garden. But it is a great wildlife vine. And shearing it, cutting it, it's like when you want to rejuvenate your vines, you know, they get kind of tired, especially the ones that lose their leaves and it's all woody. And you go, golly, how do I prune this thing? Well, you can just kind of go in and just give it a big haircut with just head shears and just shape it, because the more you cut it down, it's going to break buds much further down on the stem. And every time we do pruning, we must fertilize, whether hopefully it's organic, but you need something that is going to have some residual, not just a liquid. In full sun, this plant does not look really good because it is a part shade plant, and it does flower throughout the summer. Okay. Of course, y'all all recognize this one. This was one of Greg Grant's favorite ones, the Pam's Pink. This is at the Arbor Gate in Tomball. And when this went into bloom, it was so beautiful on that white folding lattice work. It just looks so romantic, doesn't it? It's almost like a postcard. But this is one of the few Lonicera that actually grow more in a desert situation. And coming from the Bayou City with all the rain that we've had, it doesn't do well for us because we're just too wet. It did well this year, but I think it got removed the next year. But this Pam's Pink is one that would work well for you here, and it does not get the powdery mildew. Candy corn. Doesn't it look like candy corn? This is a little tropical vine, but it's one that's really good and root hardy. It likes to be in part shade. You know, when you have a leaf that's got it's kind of a large leaf and it's really dark green, that kind of tells you that it wants more shade, because the leaf, you know, if it was more sun, it would not be as green and the leaf would be smaller. It blooms on new growth. And back when we were Zone 8 in Houston in 1985, this plant would freeze completely to the ground, but it would come back every spring. So that would probably do the same thing here for you. Have y'all grown this one in the garden? No? So that's maybe a new one. And what's so cool about it is planting it at the base of yaupon trees, because we know yaupon groves and thickets are really nice, but they get kind of boring after a while if you want to have something in there. And you could plant this at the base of a yaupon, and it's a little twiner, and it will twine itself up the tree and then flower. And of course, hummingbirds love it. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So for summer, the Mandevilla is probably the best, showiest tropical vine that there is. The Mandevilla, Alice DuPont, and then Pink Parfait, which has the white margin. These are going to be hardy for you up here because they actually make like radish tubers. And so even though the top freezes, the radish tuber, the plant will still come back from the radish tuber. They can be this long and they can be this big around, kind of like an icicle radish is what it looks like. But people get really confused with Mandevilla and Dipladenia. So Mandevilla is the Alice DuPont and has this waffly leaf. You see it looks like very heavy veins, where the Dipladenia has got a shiny, glossy, no vein, just a midrib. And when you see it in a hanging basket, that is a clue. It's only going to throw out maybe 12 to 20 inches of growth outside of that. So if you bought a red Dipladenia and you put it at the base of a 6-foot fen trellis, guess what? It's going to get maybe 3 feet, and that's it. And so a lot of people make that mistake because you'll see both of these available at the nurseries. And these are in big pots, and they normally are expensive. And then you can find the diplodenias in the little quart pots, and they're like a third the price. And people buy those, and then they plant them, and they're like, well, it wouldn't grow because it's a basket plant. Or it would make a really good container plant sitting on a balcony where it could just spill out, kind of like we would grow a plumbago. So the diplodenias can be used like a summer blooming plumbago. Just know that it is not going to be a good twiner and reach to the top of a 6-foot fan trellis. And if it freezes, it's certainly not going to come back because it doesn't have a tuber for a root. So your mandevillas, Alice DuPont, pink parfait, and when vines are blooming, they're not growing. So once vines go into bloom, that's as big as they're going to get because they're going to spend all their time and all their energy into blooming. So plants are either growing or blooming. They can't do both, and they kind of top out once they start flowering because mandevillas will flower all summer long. You may get one shoot that'll start shooting off, but mainly to keep those flowers, you're going to have some new growth, but mainly it's going to maintain right between 2 and 4 feet with flowers. Great container plant, great in-ground plant. Oops. Now, are y'all growing this one up here? It's not hardy here? Really? Bummer. Wow. This is such a cool vine. I have to say. Even if an annual, yes. This thing blooms 10, 11 months in Houston. Yes. Part shade. It's not a full sun plant. You may want to try it on your, we've all, as gardeners, we've all found our microclimates around our house, right? Whether it's the south side or the west side, or we're protected from the trees or the building that keep that north wind from freezing the plant. And have we had some wind or what? It's incredible. This plant, again, once it starts flowering, it quits growing because it's just always covered with yellow flowers. And from the yellow flowers, it produces these butterfly seed pods, which are really cool. And then the green seed pods go to brown. And even if you just kind of grew it as a little shrubby thing in a little microclimate, it's going to, even in a container in that little space, it'll give you so much enjoyment because yellow is just such a happy color.
If it does well, is this one invasive? Because I have one the green guys has those little
Butterflies,
the little,
the seed pod,
kind of a seed pod, yeah. But it's everywhere.
it's coming up everywhere.
It's not, it's not. She told me it was a butterfly, but it has seed pod.
Maybe you found the microclimate. So if y'all want to check with her. But it is no pest problems, a small vine. It's one that a lot of people use it on a gas light post. You know, we have a gas light post and they're not very tall. And so I see them a lot used to grow up to the bottom and they twine. And so they kind of keep them pruned off of the glass. But they just are covered with flowers all the time. They twine. You have to kind of, they get woody. It gets woody, and then it supports itself. But you have to tie it to get it woody. Now, if you grew it as a shrub, kind of a spilling shrub, where you could just kind of trim it and shape it, just again, like a plumbago. Okay, let's see. Evergreen wisteria, which is not really evergreen, loses its leaves. Do y'all grow that here? It's the wrong color purple, isn't it? Because the Aggies claim this one, the Aggie maroon. But this is used so much in Houston for doing arches and covering arbors. Where most wisterias only flower in the spring, this one flowers all summer long. And it's woody and easily kept, you know, a 6-foot fence. You could grow it on a wrought iron fence. If you did grow it on a wooden fence, you would have to give it some good cabling to support it because it is woody and heavy. With the flowers. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is pretty.
It's as invasive as the normal.
No, it is not. It does not make seeds and it does not send up suckers at all. And this one may be too tropical for you here, the bower vine, the Pandoria, another kind of tropical vine for you in your microclimates here. There's the variegated foliage, which is really pretty because in the shade, that variegation is really brightens up that space. It blooms on new growth. There's a solid green leaf with the pink, light pink flower with the red throat, and then there's also a solid white one. So we grow this in full sun in Houston. But I think we're kind of going back to zone 8B because seem to be getting colder. It seems like in Houston, our winters run January to June, and our summers run June to January. Because trying to plant winter color or vegetables before December is almost impossible because everything goes to seed. So that's one thing about gardening and weather. It keeps you young and you never get into a rut and you're always getting to try new things. Now, I know you can probably grow passifloras here. And this just, talk about invasive. You plant it, you love it, it grows, it freezes to the ground, it doesn't come back where you had it, it comes back everywhere else. That's the only thing about the passion vine. Except there's some varieties that are actually better behaved, but they are great host plants. It's a very interesting vine. There are many different flowers. I mean, if you're into art and drawing, I mean, these flowers are beautiful. And this variety, it's got a very thick, these petals, these tepals are very thick in the back. And this is a completely different one as well. And what is so cool about the passion vines is these, with this kind of foliage, seem to be a little bit more tropical, but they seem to be better behaved, or coming back up in the same place and not all over as root suckers. And this is actually a defense mechanism against the butterflies and the moths, because the female butterfly sees these nectar buds and she thinks those are eggs that have already been laid on the plant. And she's so smart, she is not going to lay eggs on that plant because she wants her children to survive. And this is just a defense mechanism. So look at these tendrils. Boy, they're just looking for some place to go. Peggy Martin Rose. This is just a fabulous rose. Mike Shoup calls Peggy Martin a tomboy because she is all over the place. She is rambunctious. She is thornless, no thorns. You know the story about Peggy Martin, right? The Peggy Martin rose, and how when Katrina hit New Orleans and all that salt water came into New Orleans and everything died from the salt water. Well, Peggy Martin, sitting right over here, this rose was growing in her yard. And I think it was Bill Welch was the one that found or talked with Peggy Martin about this rose. And this rose, after Katrina and all the salt water, was just as green as it could be and flowering, meaning that it was salt tolerant, salt resistant. And so it's a fabulous story. It's a fabulous rose. It's a climber. So when we grow a climbing rose, and I see people do this all the time, let's go back to that 6-foot fan trellis, okay? They'll buy a climbing rose, put the 6-foot fan trellis in place, plant the climbing rose there, and tie it up like this. And what do they have? 2 flowers on top, one here and one here. Climbing roses need to be grown like this, because when these branches are laid horizontal, all of this activates flower buds. So instead of 2 flowers, we've got 20 on each side. And so if you've had problems growing climbing roses or they haven't flowered for you, that's probably why. Because those flower buds want to come up off of those horizontal canes. Flowering almost constantly. It's already starting to flower in Houston, but clusters of flowers and the fact that it doesn't have any thorns. Those 2 things alone is fantastic.
Does it require support, like wire?
It does. A fence, a structure, you'll need to you'll need to get it up there because it's got to have a place to land because it's heavy. And I know just planting it and fanning it out like this, you could actually just maybe take some, what do they call it, cattle panels that you could maybe put at the top of a wooden fence, or don't worry about using a cattle panel down low. Put the cattle panel up starting at 4 feet because it's going to come up and you want to start spreading it out at 4 feet. And then just kind of run it long ways, and you can actually just tie it to that. And that will give it the support.
You need to trim it back every year?
You're only going to trim off the dead flowers. You're not going to cut those canes back. You will cut those tips back maybe 1/3 on the canes, because anytime we remove a tip, we activate buds further down. So when you cut a little bit off, you're only activating buds here. But if you go in and cut 1/3, you're activating buds closer in and more.
Then does it branch? Then does it want to branch after you've trimmed it back?
Yes, it will actually resprout on top. Yes. And you can train it. It does very nicely with an arch. You can train Peggy Martin on an arch very nicely. If y'all get to Houston, go to the Centennial Gardens, in their rose garden at Centennial Gardens. They have Peggy Martin on several of the arches there, and we actually trained them. The only time you're cutting canes off is when you're removing older canes that are not functioning anymore. They're tired and they're not producing any flowers, and younger canes have come up to replace it. And it's real obvious. You can see the older canes can be as big around as your thumb, where the younger ones come out and they're like, young, and you just want to train them. Now, when they come off to the front like this, if you're trying to grow it this way, take that off, because you can't get that flat. And redirect that energy to create new canes that you can grow horizontally from that point. Confederate jasmine. This is a spring bloomer only, the white one. Star jasmine, Confederate jasmine. When this thing goes into bloom, it can almost be intoxicating, overwhelming. Some people may say sickening. This is at the Houston Zoo, and it's an evergreen vine for us. Is it evergreen here? Yep. This was at Barnes & Noble in River Oaks, and I thought this was just such a cool application for a vine. It's a little narrow 12-inch bed, and they planted these 1-gallon plants, and they just kept them chopped and made them full, like a ring. And I thought that was a really neat use. Now, there is a vine, there is a root beer jasmine that actually blooms all year long. So we have 2. We have a spring bloomer and we have a summer bloomer. So the root beer jasmine, yes, it does smell like Barks root beer. I mean, it really does. And you can tell the difference because the flower has got a yellow center. The root beer jasmine, the one that blooms through the summer, has a yellow center, where the spring bloomer is solid white. And that's the difference. That's one of the characteristics. So look for the yellow center, and then of course the dead giveaway is the fact that it smells like root beer. Very easy to keep on a trellis, on an arch. Doesn't mind being sheared. It does produce a milk, a latex, which you've got to clean your shears after you cut because that milk gets really sticky. But it is fantastic. Here is our American wisteria, and our American wisteria is not as aggressive as the Chinese or the Japanese wisteria. And you may find, I don't know if Dawn offers the wisteria that Reeves grows called Dam B. So I had to call Mark, the grower, and I said, okay, so you got to tell me about this wisteria that you're calling Dam, D-A-M, and the letter B. Dam B. Does anybody know what Dam B is? You do know. I had no idea. I was like, what does Dam B mean? Oh, it came off of Dam B. I'm like, okay, all right, that's good. You want to see this. This is growing on the arbors. If you get to the Centennial Garden in the pergola on both sides, the American wisteria, the frutescens, was planted. And when it blooms, it's not as aggressive, easily maintained, and it's kind of like an early summer bloomer. Okay, so we'll talk about a few annual vines. These are grown from seed. The blue butterfly pea, y'all grow that one here? No? So this you can actually get seed. It produces seed pods everywhere, which you could actually collect the seed pods. It's a small one that could be kept on like a little 4x4 by 6 foot post or a small 6 foot fan trellis. It is a full sun-loving plant. It wants to be drought tolerant. It doesn't want wet feet. It loves to dry out in between waterings. If you've got a wet area, I highly recommend working some gravel or limestone or something in there because it likes a higher pH. Seems to perform better with a higher pH. But there's a double version, and the blue is, of course, the most popular. Now, this is another one that you grow from seed, and this is when it's really warm, and we're the beginning of summer. The Dolichos, fast-growing, grow up a 6 to 8 foot wrought iron fence, down the fence. Once they start flowering, they quit growing. And from flowering, they produce these beautiful purple seed pods. And so you can actually collect the seeds and start it over every year, or just let the seeds fall to the ground. Full sun, legume family, pea family, wants to dry out in between waterings, and just really beautiful and tough as nails. For the night garden and the white garden, the moonflower is very nice. It attracts sphinx moths to the garden. You could grow this. If you wanted to do this in a pot on your patio, I like to take old tomato cages that when you finish using them, you've got one leg going this way, you've got one leg going this way, and you're never going to get a tomato on it. You're not going to get it in the ground. I take my tomato cage, I turn it upside down, I tie the legs together and bury that first ring, and it becomes a perfect obelisk to grow some of these annual vines on. And very, very fragrant in the evening. The cypress vine, this is once you plant it, it will come up. Anybody growing this here? Ah, yes. Raise your hands again for those of you who want it. You know, it's such a ferny, dainty foliage. Beautiful red tubular flowers. The hummingbirds love it. This is its kissing cousin, the multifida, the cardinal climber. You can find both of these in seed packets like Botanical Interest. Just make sure that if you get cardinal climber, it's going to have this almost entire leaf and not be as ferny as this. Okay, so cypress vine looks like cypress needles. Cardinal climber has more of an entire leaf. They both flower well. They both attract hummingbirds. They're both summer-loving and heat-loving. But if you're looking for this, you definitely want the cypress vine. And once you plant it, the seeds drop and they just keep coming back, which is a good thing. Now, sweet peas, have you had good luck with sweet peas? Some years. You know, it's like That old adage, don't put all your flowers in one bed, eggs in one basket, because depending on what the weather is, you've got to have cool temperatures to get these things to throw blooms. This past winter for us has been horrible because we've had one day with the heater, the next day with the air conditioner. The plants are so confused, they don't know what to do. Planting the sweet peas, this is kind of a cool little contraption, but I wouldn't put it up against a wall because you're not getting sun on this side, and they want lots of sun. You know, growing your sweet peas on like an arbor or an arch, you know, a metal arch, that's a good way to grow them, but if we don't get any cold temperatures, then they don't bloom, and we have that happen a lot in the Houston area. I thought this was such a cool idea. We love nasturtiums. And our window for nasturtiums, but our cool temperatures seem to be getting longer and longer, which I am not complaining. I'm totally enjoying it. Your nasturtium is a vine. And normally you'd have like a month, 4 to 6 weeks in the spring, and 4 to 6 weeks in the fall. Kind of after the summer when it cooled off and before we had frost, and in the spring after frost, but before we got hot. But here, I mean, I think that we could grow them. They germinate. If you're trying to get grandkids interested or kids interested, they germinate before they lose their attention span on it. They don't have to wait. I mean, within a week, we've got germination. And to grow them like a vine is really a cool idea. And I think that, of course, the flowers are edible. The flower buds are edible. It's just a really cool looking plant. And there's also a variegated leafed one called Alaska Mixed. And last is the Thunbergia, the clock vine or the black-eyed Susan vine. Yellow, orange. Does that work here for you? Oh, yes. Sounds like it comes back. No, with the seeds? Okay, you never had it reseed. Yes, it is. Very drought tolerant. It comes in yellow and it comes in orange. And of course in Houston, once we get hot, kind of sitting in the pot on concrete, that's, to me, if we put this around the pool, on concrete, in full sun, in Houston, within a month it's going to be covered with spider mites. So you'll kind of want to keep the pot cool or kind of give it just a little bit of shade, because when we're in our summertime, you know, full sun from sun up to sundown is about 14 hours. So all they need is 6. So do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am. You know, I started to put that slide in here. Yes. Yes, that is fun, to grow the loofah sponges. And it looks like a cucumber vine. I mean, the leaves look like a cucumber. And we actually had it at, we grew it at the Centennial Gardens. It ran up a trellis, and it loved to get on top of the black shade cloth because it made the fruit, and the black shade cloth held the fruit up there, and we produced some really big ones. So yes, get them in right after frost when it warms up, and they will produce those loofah sponges for you. So yes, you grow them from seed. They need a structure and they need lots of sun. And then once they start making the fruit, they need support. Old pantyhose or something to kind of support them. Yes? The Houston Centennial Gardens is at Herman Park, where, you know, the Rose Garden used to be, where the Garden Center used to be. Everybody should be familiar with the Garden Center at Herman Park. That's where they always used to have the lectures. It's right in Herman Park, across from the Cockerel Butterfly Center. The Herman Park Conservancy spent $33 million on this garden, and it's fabulous. And it has what they call a mount, which is a spiral walk up to the top where you can look down, and they have all these waterfalls going down. They have a family garden, a woodland garden, vegetable garden, pergola. It's a great day trip. Something blooming all the time, yes. And you can Google it. It's Herman Park Centennial Gardens. Yes. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.